Heathcliff's boner was poking her the whole time. Why am I talking about boobs? This is the skin of a killer, Bella. So I kind of like the new Wuthering Heights movie. This guy stinks! Hi, if you're new here, my name is Maxine and I analyze movies and media. I have no credentials, but I hope you'll stay for my unique charm and winning personality. So the new Wuthering Heights movie polarized audiences, it seems. You were either leaving the theater in tears or you were rolling your eyes. So naturally, a movie like this is going to be subject to endless discourse. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it racist? Is it enshittified romance slop that's a sign of the end times? Maybe it's all these things, I don't know. But one thing is for sure, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I know that's controversial to say on the internet, and I'm gonna say something even more controversial. I think Wuthering Heights is camp. Okay, so a bit of a disclaimer, I'm not going to be recapping the book or the movie for this video because you've probably already seen all those videos if you clicked on this one. This video is mostly going to be focused around the discourse surrounding the movie and also my interpretation of the movie as camp. So let's get started. Part 1, camp. What is camp? Is camp just when a homosexual likes something? Is camp when something's so bad it's good? Is Chapel Roan camp? Or drag queens camp? Is musical theater camp? I think camp is one of those things that's kind of hard to pin down, kind of like a bratty bottom, you know? But I'm gonna try and do the impossible and define it. I think a piece of art is camp if it's an unserious work of art that asks to be taken seriously. The words serious and unserious are doing a lot of work here, so let's do a bit of gay science and break this statement down even further. I think a piece of art is camp if it's 1, made with a high degree of self-expression, and 2, made with a low degree of self-awareness. So what does high degree of self-expression mean? I think that this means the artist takes their work seriously. The art is sincere and earnest and unabashed. It's very expressive, and the artist never diminishes themselves in order to make the art more palatable. The expressive artist doesn't undermine themselves or self-deprecate. Highly expressive art is often overly emotional and stylistic. But one thing it never is ironic. And I think that's where people get tripped up because camp is so closely tied to irony. But I think it's our enjoyment of it that's a little ironic and tongue-in-cheek. And that's an important distinction. The second component of camp, namely the low degree of self-awareness, is what really makes camp camp. A low degree of self-awareness means that the artist is not self-aware enough to understand that their art won't be taken seriously by its intended audience. There's a lot of reasons why an artist might not be self-aware. They might overestimate their confidence. They might not be as skilled in their craft as they thought they were. Maybe they don't understand their own societal and cultural position well enough to understand how their art will be received, and they might accidentally create something racist or problematic as a result. I mean, that sounds familiar, right? Okay, so let's analyze some things and see if they're camp or not. Is this children's drawing camp? I mean, it seems to satisfy both conditions. It's highly expressive, but also made with a low degree of self-awareness. But no, this children's drawing is not camp. I think the reason we don't interpret this as camp is because the child is not self-aware, but we don't expect them to be. So there is a form of expectation around how self-aware an artist should be. So is Chapel Roan camp? Is musical theater camp? Are drag performances camp? So I think to understand this, we have to get even more scientific. Take a look at this graph. On the x-axis here, we have self-awareness, and on the y-axis here, we have self-expression. Here on the top left, we have the intersection of high expression and low awareness. This is where camp exists. So where do drag queens, musical theater, and Chapel Roan belong? I think they actually belong up here in the top right. I call this top right quadrant slay. Let's talk about musical theater as an example. Musical theater is interesting because it feels like camp. I think there's something very unserious about singing an entire stage play. Musical theater is often overly emotional. It's over the top. It's excessively stylized, just how works of camp are. But what makes musical theater slay and not camp is that musical theater is self-aware. It owns up to its bombastic nature. All the campy aspects of musical theater are on purpose. I would call musical theater a performance of camp. I would say that it's true to call it campy, but it's not camp, capital C, camp. So I think musical theater generally occupies this space in the top right corner of this graph. And maybe high school theater belongs up here in the top left. For similar reasons, Chappell Roan and drag performances also belong up here in the slay zone. Probably wondering what these two quadrants down here are. Down here in the bottom left quadrant is cringe, and down here in the bottom right corner is basic. This is where Marvel movies belong, and cringe is where bad stand-up comedy belongs. I could make a whole hour-long video just about this graph, honestly. So now, where does Wuthering Heights belong? I think the critics of this movie would put it in the cringe quadrant, and I think proponents of the movie would put it in the slay quadrant. But I would actually put it up here in the top left, right next to the camp classic Twilight. Part 2, Twilight. You're probably wondering what the 2008 Twilight adaptation has to do with Wuthering Heights. But what doesn't it have to do with Wuthering Heights? The movies are basically the same. Both these movies are edgy and moody. They're both made for teenage girls. Both were received not well critically, and they've both been panned by the so-called woke left. Both the movies cast a white man for a character of color. The discourse surrounding both these movies have uncanny parallels. In case you don't remember, public perception of Twilight really soured in the 2010s. People realized that at best it's just this dumb movie for girls, and at worst it's a piece of propaganda that normalizes large age gaps, emotional manipulation. But I think recently Twilight's reputation has kind of done a 180, especially within the queer community. I think the homosexuals have come to enjoy Twilight as a camp classic. I think there's no better way to understand why Twilight is considered a camp classic than to watch the infamous baseball scene. So if you haven't seen Twilight, there's a famous scene where the main character Bella goes to play baseball with her vampire boyfriend Edward and his vampire family. And because his family is like all vampires, they're really fucking good at baseball because they're all impossibly fast and strong. And they have to play baseball during thunderstorms because when they hit the ball, it sounds like thunder. And yeah, this whole premise is already kind of contrived and overcooked. But honestly, I can't do the scene justice just by talking about it, so let's watch. So the scene opens up with a crack of lightning and Edward's sister Alice saying, "It's time." And just look at the form on her pitch. Iconic. I also love the subtle slow motion here, which there's a lot of slow motion like all throughout this whole scene. There's this funny shot where we follow the ball as it's entering the forest. Like, the arc of this ball is so unnatural. And while Edward is trying to catch the ball, we get a random shot of Jasper doing this with the bat. Like, it's so random. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that all of this is scored by the Muse song Supermassive Black Hole, which is just, it's a song choice for sure. Next up, we have Edward's dad Carlisle going up to bat, and I love this shot of Carlisle holding the bat. This is incredible. And after Carlisle hits the ball, Edward and Emmett both go to jump for the ball and they collide with each other right as lightning strikes. The scene is so awesome. I think the scene epitomizes the dual aspects of camp. The high expression part of the scene is obvious. The color grading is bold. The music is bold. The slow-mo is over the top. This shot of Carlisle holding the bat is just incredible. I love this. Nothing about this scene is holding back. But I think what really makes this scene click is that it thinks it's cool like a music video, but it's not. The scene is silly and goofy. It's this disconnect between how seriously the editors, the cinematographer, the director Catherine Hardwicke are taking the scene and how we, the audience, are receiving the scene. This disconnect is what makes this scene work. It's what makes it camp. If this scene were any better from a technical perspective, it would be worse off for it. And it's not just this scene. This movie is filled with scenes like this. For example, the scene where Bella's confessing to Edward that she knows he's a vampire, that scene is also incredibly campy. This is the skin of a killer, Bella. So Twilight's revival in pop culture is kind of recent. I feel like there's a long time where the book and movie were criticized endlessly for their problematic elements, especially in the 2010s when blog era feminism was popping off. Here is an excerpt from a 2018 Bustle article titled, "I Reread Twilight as an Adult Feminist" by Stephanie Watson. When I first read Twilight, I loved it because it was a fun mix of macabre and romantic. I love how unapologetically melodramatic it was. But after revisiting the movie and the book, I believe that my initial feelings about the trilogy were wrong. I downplayed legitimate critiques of abuse, of misogyny, of racism. This quote is so fascinating to me because what does it mean for a feeling to be wrong? Can feelings be wrong? Part 3, the discourse. So let's talk about the discourse. Most of the discourse I've seen around the movie orients around two main points. One, the movie erases the racial aspect of the book, which is key to understanding Heathcliff and Catherine's dynamic. And two, the movie washes down themes of abuse and trauma and turns it into enshittified romance slop. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge I think both these points are true. The 1847 Emily Bronte novel Wuthering Heights is a classic for a reason. It's this epic, multi-generational story about trauma, envy, revenge, the cycle of abuse. But it's also about redemption and breaking the cycle of abuse. And yes, it does contain a love story between Catherine and Heathcliff, but both of them are like codependent and have borderline personality disorder, so their relationship is extremely fucked. There's a lot of messed up things that happen in this book. Catherine's brother Hindley, for example, he tries to kill his own son by dropping him off a balcony. Heathcliff kills Isabella's dog and then abuses her. Heathcliff also digs up Catherine's grave to put his hair in her locket. Like, this book was disturbing, especially for its time. But this Emerald Fennell adaptation of Wuthering Heights was anything but disturbing. I think critics are correct in that it takes this complex and nuanced book and reduces it into something much dumber. She really took a piece of classic literature and flattened it into contemporary romance. The discourse around this movie reminded me a lot of the Eve Sedgwick essay, Paranoid and Reparative Reading. In her essay, Sedgwick outlines two ways we can interact with the world: the paranoid position and the depressive position. And these are concepts she borrows from psychoanalyst Melanie Klein. From the paranoid position creates paranoid readings of media, but from the depressive position creates reparative readings of media. So this is all very psychoanalytical. You're probably wondering, like, what the hell is this homosexual talking about? So I'm going to try and distill it and explain it in simple terms. Let's first talk about the paranoid position. The paranoid position is kind of what it sounds like. It's about a suspicious way of looking at things. It's about separating the world into good and bad so we can avoid the bad. According to psychoanalyst Melanie Klein, we learn to do this when we're babies. An example for babies might look like this. The baby lives a very chaotic life, right? They might not get milk whenever they're hungry, and that's frustrating, that's overwhelming. So the baby learns to adopt a paranoid position in order to cope with the chaos of the world. They separate their mother's boob into good boob and bad boob. The good boob is one that provides milk on time and it's very warm and delicious. And the bad boob is one that doesn't provide milk on time and, is frustrating and bad. Through this splitting, the baby is able to deal with their negative emotions by projecting it onto a so-called bad boob. Through this splitting, the baby learns to cry and whine when they get the bad boob. The reason the baby does this is to deal with their feelings of hatred and frustration and to separate those feelings from the feelings of nourishment and comfort that come with the good boob. Okay, so why am I talking about boobs? All of this is to explain that the paranoid way of looking is about splitting the world into good and bad, worthy and unworthy. If we split the world into good and bad, we can hate the bad, we can avoid the bad, or at the very least, anticipate the bad. So what does this psychoanalytic bullshit have to do with Wuthering Heights? As you've probably noticed, discourse on the internet is usually centered around negative feelings. The reason why it's like this is because discourse is powered by paranoia. It's powered by this tendency we learn as babies to split the world into good and bad. So even before the Wuthering Heights movie came out, people were already quick to label this movie as bad. Here are some YouTube comments on the trailer for the movie. If you really listen closely, at the end you can hear Emily Bronte screaming from beyond the grave. Nothing like a toxic, abusive relationship promotion on Valentine's Day to get everyone in the mood. Greatest love story? A gothic revenge about generational trauma, class, and unrequited desire? Yeah, I don't know if this will work. Came for the comments. Was not disappointed, lol. Also, prior to the movie's release, people were very upset about Fennell's casting decision to cast Jacob Elordi, a white man, to play Heathcliff, a man of color. So we can see people engaging in this sort of paranoid behavior. But what about the critics? Well, after the movie came out, it seemed that every critic hated this movie and made it their mission to educate and inform everyone about why this movie sucked. Why can't people just be allowed to enjoy things? Why are critics so serious all the time? Is the critic's job just to yuck people's yums? I mean, yeah, kind of. I think within the modern social media discourse ecosystem, critics exist as kind of a vanguard between the serious and the slop. Critics don't necessarily tell you what to like, but they do tell you if something is worth liking or not. Critics would probably tell you that this job is important because media literacy, anti-intellectualism is on the rise, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I'm being a little flippant. I do respect the job of a critic. I think critics have a higher level of consciousness than the average person. And I don't mean that in a pretentious way. I mean that in the sense that they study media and criticism and they go to school for this type of thing. Critics also better understand the systems of oppression and cultural context in which media gets made. A critic might point out that the reason the Wuthering Heights movie watered down all the thorny themes of the book is because it's ultimately a capitalist project that's aimed at getting women to drag their boyfriends to go see this movie for Valentine's Day. That was me. I dragged my partner to go watch this movie with me. So if discourse is powered by paranoia, critics are probably the most paranoid of them all. Critics, at least it seems like on my side of the internet, are always on the lookout for instances of white supremacy, patriarchy, classism in everything. They're always suspicious of the systems of oppression that undergird all media that's made. And they make it their job to expose how these oppressive systems influence the media that we consume. But to what end are critics doing this? Do they just not want people to enjoy things? What are critics paranoid of? Is it the death of media literacy? I mean, maybe. If I were more paranoid, I would say that critics are paranoid because paranoia is contagious. It's viral in the same way conspiracy theories are viral. And this virality helps boost engagement. But I think if we zoom out and examine the broader discourse ecosystem, I think we can see that maybe this paranoia isn't about media literacy or any of that at all. If we take a look at these YouTube comments again, what are these people paranoid of? I think your average person is paranoid of something else. Because why are these people so suspicious? The movie hasn't even come out yet. This is a trailer. Are these people just virtue signaling? And if they are, what are they signaling? And to who? Hi! Say hi! So I was on a date with someone once. This is a tangent, but I promise it relates. So I was on a date with someone once and the topic of Twilight came up, as it always does. And I remember that she said that she liked the books as a kid, but almost immediately in a bout of self-consciousness, she said that, yeah, the books actually aren't very good reading them now. They haven't aged that well. And it almost felt like she was embarrassed to admit that she even liked them in the first place. I only tell this story because this moment stuck with me. And I think the reason it stuck with me is because it made me sad. So what is it that all these discourse enjoyers are paranoid of? Are we afraid of calling ourselves a feminist and then turning around and enjoy this book where 104-year-old vampire grooms a 17-year-old? Are we afraid of crying at a movie that everyone thinks is smooth-brained? I mean, what does that say about us? I'll admit, I did cry at the end of the Wuthering Heights movie. And I did feel embarrassed because after I got home and I got online, all my favorite feminist writers and video essayists told me this movie was ass cheeks. So was Stephanie Burton right? Can feelings be wrong? I don't think so, but they can be humiliating. Part 4, the repair. So remember how I said that Eve Sedgwick outlined 2 positions from which we can analyze media? Well, we already talked about the paranoid position, but let's talk about the other one, the depressive position. The depressive position is an anxiety mitigating achievement that the infant or adult only sometimes, and often only briefly, succeeds in inhabiting. This is the position from which it's possible in turn to use one's own resources to assemble or repair the murderous part objects into something like a whole. Though I'd like to emphasize, not necessarily like any pre-existing whole. Once assembled to one's own specifications, the more satisfying object is available both to be identified with and to offer one nourishment and comfort in turn. Among Klein's name for the reparative process is love. I think that's beautiful. But what the hell does it even mean? Again, I'm not trying to dive deep into psychoanalytic territory here, so I'm going to use the baby example again to explain this. From the paranoid position, the baby learns to separate their mom's boob into good boob and bad boob. But it's only from the depressive position that the baby can realize that the good boob and bad boob are actually the same thing. It's just their mother's boob. The reason it's called the depressive position is because the baby gets depressed about losing the good boob, but they also gain something. They realize that the bad boob was never out to get them in the first place. Both the good boob and the bad boob were the same boob, and it always was that way. It always has been, and it always will be. The boob is just a fallible object belonging to a fallible mother. And so from the depressive position, the baby learns to repair the mom's murderous part object, the boob, into something whole again. The great loss of this depressive position is that we need to let go of our belief in paradise and perfection. In the paranoid schizoid position, a perfect union with a perfect object was possible. Now we have to settle for good enough. I think deconceptualizing movies as either good or bad or worthy and unworthy is what Eve Sedgwick means by reparative reading. Maybe a movie's merit or lack thereof shouldn't be based on how problematic the movie is or how faithful the movie is to the book. Maybe there's a critical framework that exists that isn't concerned about the merit of the work at all or how it feeds into systems of oppression. What if we looked at Wuthering Heights through a reparative lens? So I'm not going to take any more dookies on this movie. I'm instead just going to tell you why I really enjoyed this movie and why I thought this movie was camp. So I thought Wuthering Heights was camp. I think the reason people haven't made this observation yet is because, one, the hyper-political environment that we're currently in has got everyone very, very paranoid. And two, we're just standing too close to the movie right now. I think this movie is very similar to Twilight in the way that I think in 20 years we're going to have a lot warmer of a reception to this movie than we do today. I think that people might not realize it now, but Wuthering Heights is like the perfect 2020s time capsule. So there are two aspects of camp: high expression, low awareness. I do think Wuthering Heights is highly expressive as a movie. This movie feels exactly like how I would expect a 14-year-old white girl to adapt this movie if she had the money and resources to do so. And I mean that as a compliment. First off, the dynamic between The dynamic between Catherine and Heathcliff is incredibly juvenile. When we're first introduced to these characters as teenagers, the two of them have a very bantery dynamic. It's something that feels like it's pulled out of a contemporary romance novel. They banter, they're like passive aggressive, they play pranks on each other. Even though the visual tone of this movie is kind of gothic, the tone of Catherine and Heathcliff's dialogue is not at all gothic. It's giving teen romance. Catherine and Heathcliff are very bad at communicating, and it feels like one of those rom-coms where the two main characters just don't confess their feelings to each other because they suck at communicating, and that's the whole conflict. Another account of the high expressiveness of this movie comes with the movie's attempts at depicting the erotic. I'm, of course, going to be talking about the BDSM scene. So there's a scene where Catherine goes up to Heathcliff's loft in order to confess her feelings to him, but she doesn't get a chance to do so because Joseph, a servant, who in the book, he's like this Bible-thumping servant, but in the movie, I guess he's like really into bondage. So Joseph, he starts having hardcore bondage sex with another servant, and Catherine is about to scream, but Heathcliff comes up behind her and covers her mouth. And the two of them are like pressed against the floorboards watching Joseph have sex. And then after Joseph nuts, I guess, Catherine like runs away because Heathcliff's boner was poking her the whole time. This whole scene is crazy. I know the scene got some white women in the audience very excited, but for me, it was just kind of really funny and entertaining. Like, that scene was such a big swing on Fennell's part, and did she hit it out of the park? Kind of. Why is Joseph so kinky? Why are there leather straps hanging from the ceiling? What is going on? Fennell also takes a big swing in the third act when Heathcliff marries Isabella, Edgar's ward, in order to get back at Edgar for marrying Catherine. We see Heathcliff enter like this sub-dom owner puppy girl relationship with Isabella, and Isabella's like into it, like it's consensual, which like, okay. I thought the scene was so funny because in the book, Heathcliff kills Isabella's dog, and this is such a wild reinterpretation of that. Isabella's character is also kind of neurodivergent in the movie, which is like, okay, neurodivergent puppy girl. Feels a little transphobic. I'm sorry. I shouldn't air out our community's laundry like that. And obviously, I haven't even talked about the music yet. I loved the music for this movie. The music for this movie was insane. So the intro scene is scored by the Charlie song House, which is like really funny to me because that sound is like a TikTok sound. There's also a scene where Catherine finally decides to marry Edgar instead of Heathcliff, and there's this really visually striking shot of her walking through the moors, and Chains of Love by Charli XCX is playing. If you listen to the lyrics of this song, it's so on the nose. Nothing about this movie is subtle at all. Shattering like glass, yes, they're breaking up my heart. The chains of love are cruel. I shouldn't feel like a prisoner. Like, it's so obvious. They're like stating the theme of the story, like in the lyrics. So clearly this movie is expressive. It's very bold. It's very 14-year-old teenage girl. But what about the second aspect of camp? Is this movie self-aware? The answer is no, this movie's not self-aware. First of all, this movie lacks any type of subtlety. So there's this scene where Catherine's dad dies and she goes to visit him, like his dead body at Wuthering Heights. And she's like leaning over his body, and in the background are these two mountains of just empty wine bottles, I'm assuming. And they're like stacked as tall as the ceiling. And it's like, yeah, Emerald, we get it. He was an alcoholic. This scene is very, very dumb in the sense that, like, there's no input necessary from me as the viewer in order to understand this scene. But I think it also draws into question, like, how self-aware is this movie? Like, are we seriously supposed to gasp at how many bottles there are? Like, is this supposed to be shocking? It's not coming across that way. It's coming across as goofy. There are lots of odd and goofy moments in the movie like this. I also thought the bondage scene had similar vibes. Like, this movie is just kind of tasteless and tacky at times, but that's what I love about it. I know people on Letterboxd were complaining that this movie was just basically fan fiction, which, yeah, it does feel like a teenage girl's fan fiction of Wuthering Heights, but that's incredible. I think this movie's very similar to Twilight in that way. I think there's something very fun about reimagining this gothic epic tale as kind of stupid fan fiction. And I will say, even if the movie is tasteless, I don't think it's totally void of an emotional core. This part is a little bit embarrassing, but I did cry at the end of this movie. I do think Heathcliff is queer in some sense of the word. I think it's a very common experience for trans people to feel like how Heathcliff did in this movie. I think Catherine is attracted to Heathcliff, but she confesses that it would degrade her to marry Heathcliff. I can kind of relate to this feeling as a trans woman because society is attracted to trans women. They want to fuck trans women. They might even want to, casually date a trans woman, but they never want to marry a trans woman. They never want to take a trans woman home to meet the parents. And in the movie, Heathcliff has to get with another trans girl, Isabella, who's like into puppy play. And he's only like perfunctorily into it, that's a transgender experience right there. Also, Kathy and Heathcliff's doomed romance reminded me that for so many gay men of the past, love just wasn't enough. There were so many material and cultural barriers to getting married back then, or not getting married because it wasn't legal, but just being together. And I wonder how many gay men had to watch their partner pass away from AIDS in the arms of another. How many of these men weren't invited to their partner's funeral because the wife's family didn't want them there? Like, I don't know. I wasn't making these connections on a cerebral level as I was watching the movie, I think, but I was making these connections on an emotional level. Like the final scene where Heathcliff embraces a already dead Catherine, it made me cry. By this point in the video, some of you are probably commenting like, well, actually, this movie sucks because of X, Y, and Z, and also, this movie's not queer. You're just projecting. And trust me, I understand that urge. I've been that person before. And I think we have this compulsion to correct other people's opinions because we assume that some gap in knowledge is the reason why other people are misunderstanding the movie. And if we close this knowledge gap, then we can all get on the same page, the correct page. But I think there's a flaw in reasoning here. I think people put too much faith in knowledge. Closing the knowledge gap might not necessarily change someone's mind. If you've ever talked politics with your annoying family members, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So maybe when we see someone else like something for the wrong reasons, we shouldn't try and correct them. We should try and ask, why? Maybe we can try putting on different lenses to see if we can see the movie how they're seeing it. I think this sense of curiosity is the soul of reparative reading. Reparative reading is centered around empathy and love for other people, and also empathy and love for ourselves. When we like something we're not supposed to, we don't tell ourselves that our feelings are wrong. We try and understand ourselves a little bit better instead. I feel like for a lot of us, this reparative mindset is unintuitive. I mean, what about media literacy? Isn't that still important too? Here's what Eve Sedgwick has to say about that. Reparative motives, once they become explicit, are inadmissible in paranoid theory because they are merely about pleasure and because they are frankly ameliorative. What makes pleasure and amelioration so mere? I personally think there's nothing mere about pleasure and amelioration. I think in this sort of fucked up world and current political climate, we ought to hang on to feelings of pleasure and amelioration. We ought to cherish these feelings and understand them. I think if we see someone leave the Wuthering Heights movie in tears, we shouldn't assume they're misunderstanding the movie or that they're not sophisticated. Again, it might seem like I'm dogging on paranoid critics here. I'm not. I'm not saying that the paranoid position is a bad one because, well, that'd be paranoid of me to do so. But I also think a ton of good criticism results from paranoid reading. I think it's also fun to shit on things we think are stupid and dumb. I think that's human nature. I also understand that people have to get paid and negative discourse is what drives engagement. I'll probably shit on other movies on this channel. Like, I'm not above that. What I am saying though is that the paranoid position and the paranoid mindset is not the only way we can engage with media. It's not the only way to be a critic. Maybe being a critic can be about providing new ways of seeing and understanding a piece of media that isn't talked about. I hope I was able to provide a camp lens to watch this movie with this video. Here's what Eve Sedgwick has to say about camp in her essay. To view camp as, among other things, the communal, historically dense exploration of a variety of reparative practices is to do better justice to many of the defining elements of classic camp. This passage is so overwritten. I actually get so annoyed when essayists do this because it's like, do you want people to not understand your work? Oh, look at this anti-intellectual over here. So I actually fed this passage into ChatGPT, so you and I can both understand it. I love the bit here about how part of camp is the over-attachment to fragmentary, marginal, waste, or leftover products. I think that's one of the beautiful things about camp. It's about finding value in what other people deem worthless or lowbrow or unimportant. I think the reason the gays love camp is because The gays are experts at finding value in the worthless, finding joy in the hard times. Gay people have always had to relate to media that wasn't designed for them. I think the gays have always had this reparative mindset because it was a survival mechanism. Maybe not a physical one, but a spiritual one. I hope you're able to see the new Wuthering Heights movie how I saw it, and if you can't, that's okay. I'm not here to be prescriptive, okay? I do sincerely believe that in 20 years, we're gonna look back at this movie the same way we look back on Twilight now. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Maxine Skye, and if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I know it's like something all YouTubers say as sort of a perfunctory thing, but I think it'll really help me figure out what you guys like, and any form of feedback this early on in my channel career is honestly so helpful. So thank you all for sticking it through to the end. Love you. Bye.